So in the performance on last semester's exam, we saw a very bimodal behavior. And not just bimodal as in some people scored very high, some people scored very low. Rather, bimodal in that on some types of questions, the results would be very impressive. On other questions, they'd be embarrassingly bad. Even with the same person. A large intrapersonal spread in level. So what's going on? Spoiler alert, we need to climb the period of Bloom's taxonomy. That'll be the next topic, though. First, well, I've got to save my old students. They were good. So I say now, despite the evidence I've presented thus far. What was really going on? Were people unethical cheaters? It really didn't look like it. And as far as copying, it was very pervasive, like 20 to 50%, maybe more. And that behavior didn't really seem to correlate with perceived academic strength of a student or perceived ethics. It was just flat across the board. And so a causal correlation between the effect of copying and the cause of immorality wasn't really explaining the phenomenon that I saw. And of course, this came to me while I'm walking to class one day, and I don't feel good if I get to class and haven't solved my problem yet. So we actually, what I decided was that we need to go beyond current theories of good and evil, to paraphrase Nietzsche. What we normally have is a benevolence versus nefariousness aspect. Someone's kind-hearted, someone's mean. And that's the only dimension between good and evil, usually. So, okay, let's start with that. Where does that get us? Well, okay, let's look at God. All good. Satan, all bad. What about this guy? Well, somewhere in the middle. Okay, well, half God plus half Satan. What does that get you? That gets you a morally ambiguous superhero, like Loki from the Norse legends or Avengers, or Shazam from a more recent movie. Like where he's a shallow person who has superpowers but just uses them to show off or to get something really quick. And then there's Loki who really just cares about playing jokes on people. Sometimes he's a good guy, sometimes he's a bad guy, and he switches like every 20 minutes. Okay, well, most people aren't Satan, they aren't God, they gotta be somewhere in the middle. But if I look outside, the world isn't full of Lokis and Shazams. It's not full of demi-villains and shallow superheroes. So our one-dimensional theory of good and evil is clearly inadequate. It just doesn't doesn't predict the observed phenomenon of Joe with bag of donuts and normal people. Well, a one-dimensional theory doesn't predict it. What do? Get another dimension. So far we have the benevolent versus nefarious axis. Let's add another axis. Competent versus incompetent. Well, both God and the devil, okay, one's benevolent, one's nefarious, but they're both highly competent. Now, let's explore the other side of the x-axis. Nefarious but incompetent. What's that? It's the comic relief villain. Wile E. Coyote, Invader Zim. Someone who tries to hurt people, but he never actually does anything evil because his attempts at evil fail. And so you're worried something's bad is going to happen, but then it turns out to just be funny. Nefarious but incompetent, the comic relief character. What about benevolent but incompetent? That's a lot of people. People who try to do good, but we're just not all that successful in our aspirations or work. Geez, that describes Oh, all those mediocre people out there, all the people around me. That describes a lot of us. Most middling employees, comic relief villains, the devil, God. With our 2D theory of good and evil, now we can describe most people. Where were my students? Well, the degree of copying didn't really seem to correlate with perceived degree of ethics. It was a real wash on the nefarious versus benevolent axis. So, what about the other axis? It seemed that people were just doing the best that they could, and that the results that I was seeing was just the best that they could do. We were not where we want to be on the incompetence and competence axis. Hopefully with this course, we'll find some thinking tools via which to pull ourselves up on the operational competence axis. Hopefully people will choose to use these capacities for good rather than evil, but we only have that choice to make after we've pulled ourselves up the ladder of competence. How one would do that, we'll start to address in the next video. Okay, see you again soon.